Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Are you guys able to hear me?
I hear you, Mahesh. Good morning.
Good morning. All right, this is the Netconf working group meeting for IETF 110. We have, if I can scroll, yeah, I'm having problems with. I'm not able to scroll for some reason. Let me stop sharing and I'll come back in a sec. All right, let's hope that works this time. All right, so here's the note well for the meeting that you guys are familiar with. As far as the Meet Echo is concerned, I hope you guys are here, so you must have seen the link. You should be able to see the chat window that you can actually detach and keep it as a separate tab. And the hum window is, I think, next to the chat. Or if you remove, it's now right next to the list of attendees. And that's where, if any polls are conducted, you will see any messages. The virtual blue sheet, you don't have to do anything. The Meet Echo will record your presence. And the queue, of course, will be managed by Meet Echo.
Mahesh, just a quick thing. I did post a link to the suggesting people sign into a virtual blue sheet at the bottom of the CodeMD page. So maybe that was miscommunication. But okay.
Not a bad idea still, if you want to put your name down. To queue, make sure that you use the microphone icon with the hand symbol to indicate that you want to speak. And then, of course, when it's your turn to speak, you can use the microphone icon with the play symbol. Actually, there's no play symbol, it's just the microphone icon now. So there's a hand raised to get into the queue, and of course, the microphone to speak. Jabber, we'll see in the next slide. There is also a note-taking pad. So would love to have everyone contribute to that page. We use that to compile our minutes at the end of the meeting. And my screen is stuck again. Give me 1 second. Okay. For Jabber setup, here are the instructions. You can find the answers to all your questions. Whatever you post on Jabber will, of course, get cross-posted to the Meet Echo chat window, which is what we will be monitoring. And of course, the logs will be available after the meeting at the link provided. So here's the status of the workgroup items. The Yang push notification capabilities passed the second working group last call, and Kent has provided a Shepard's review of the document. And I believe recently the authors have provided an update. Trust anchors and key stores, a set of drafts that are, I believe, still in working group last call. They went through, the two of them went through sector review, and I believe currently we are waiting on Yang Doctor's response. For cryptotypes, which is the third draft in that suite of drafts that we sent for working group last call, is waiting on a sector review at this time. And just like Trust Anchor and Keystore, we're still waiting on Yang Doctor's response to the comments we have that the author has provided. The client server suite of drafts, which is the remaining set of drafts, will start working group last call after IETF 110. The HTTPS notification is in working group last call still. And then Yang push notification messages. Yes, it has expired, and the last time we said we would probably wait for HTTPS notif to go through before resurrecting this draft. At this point, I believe the two can be are not linked anymore, and the push notification messages can the authors can go ahead and provide an update. The UDP notif draft is work in progress, and so is the distributed notif draft. And finally, the SCTP CSR draft is in working group last call. Any comments or questions? So I do notice that Benoit has said that the Yang push notification capabilities, he will address the comments that Ken provided, which is good. All right, and if there are no other comments, here's what we, actually the agenda is slightly modified from what it's here. We are going to get an update on the UDP or Unite set of drafts before this. And then Kent will come on to present his client server suite of drafts. And the CSR SCTP bootstrapping draft. That'll be followed by me on the HTTP base transport for configured subscription. And as I said, Tom, I think Thomas and then our peer are going to present the Unite set of drafts up front. On the non-charted suite set of drafts, we have Peng Lui talking about telemetry data export capabilities, followed by Chin. Okay, I think I have the agenda wrong here. So let me just read off what's actually in them. So we have telemetry data export capability followed by adaptive subscription, which will be followed by with system capabilities. And then finally, I'll come back to talk a little bit about Netconf Next and RESTconf Next. And that's as far as the agenda is concerned. All right, with that, let me stop sharing. And I believe Tomas is supposed to present
Mahesh, between your two shares, could I just say something? We did receive sorry, this is Kent. We did receive a liaison request from the OIF Technical Committee. They are, noted this is the 220 Transport SDN API Interoperability Demonstration White Paper, and they're having a virtual meeting scheduled in 2 days. No, I'm sorry, not 2 days, May the 10th, not March the 10th. And actually, I would share this screen, but there's a number of OIF individuals on the participant list, as well as some names that we are familiar with, Anis Sheikh and Rob Shakir from OpenConfig. I don't know if they're on the call, if they want to say anything about it. Let me see if they're on the call. I don't see either on the call. So anyway, I just want to let the group know about the liaison request.
All right, Tomas, I know. Okay.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you see my screen?
Not screen yet, but I can see your video and hear your voice.
Okay, perfect. Then I will start. I would like to give a brief presentation what we did last week in the virtual hackathon with BMP and push. In this presentation, I will just focus on the push part in case you want to see also what we did on the BMP, on the BGP monitoring protocol part, then please follow up the link, the presentation. So regarding Yang push, our focus was mainly on the two drafts, UDP notif and distributed notif. We have been working for quite a while in an open source project where we are working on the collection library and also on a mockup publisher. And within this hackathon, we were finalizing the work there and integrating into the PMACCT open source network data collection. Yes, this was in regards to
slides, just to let you know.
In regards of performance.
Sorry, Tomas, just quickly, I think Mahesh is still trying to bring up your slides, so just give him a second for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
give me one.
Can you see the slides now?
Well, maybe
no.
maybe I should let him present it till I figure out what's happening at my end.
Sure,
So,
that's okay.
Okay. I see. Okay. So then let me go back. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, good. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. As I said, on the functionality part, we were working on the integration into PMACCT for the collection library and also for the mockup publisher. And for the performance part, we were looking into testing the efficiency. After all, for us important is scaling, that we can get as fast as possible the matrix from the network, and also see how it performs in terms of various packet sizes. So that's the software we used within this network environment, and the collector and also the mockup software, both are implemented in C. Segmentation is supported, and it has been integrated into PMACCT. This is basically, in this hackathon, the first time we were able to produce matrix into Apache Kafka. And in regards to the performance test setup, which we did is we were basically set one dedicated core on this Linux machine for the collector. We did in 10 test runs with 500,000 messages each, and we were varying basically the message sizes between 200 bytes, 1,500 and jumbo frames, and depending on the packet size, we achieved different throughput, which is much higher with the current proprietary Young Push implementations. So we are quite pleased with the results which we achieved. Well, that's for the hackathon so far. Any questions?
I see Shufeng Liu has his hand up.
Sure.
Shufeng, are you able to request a microphone? Okay, I don't see that anymore. In the chat window, SLM is asking about the blue sheet. Apparently, MeetEcho will automatically log your attendance in the call, so you don't need to actually sign the blue sheet. And I'm going to remove Shufeng from the queue. Thomas, please proceed. Or I guess you're done. Any other questions for Thomas? Oh.
That's as far from my side. Otherwise, if you have a question in regards of the implementations, please feel free to contact me.
Thomas, I have one question for you. You said the performance was much better. Was that in terms of a latency or throughput or both? And also, can you give any relative numbers as to what the proprietary implementations are achieving?
Mm-hmm. I can say that we haven't been testing on latency, so we were focusing this time only on throughput, and it's hard to compare it to existing implementation with gRPC. But what we've seen is we are by factors well beyond 10, 20 times higher than gRPC. But one of our next goals basically throughout the year is now to add basically also HTTPS notif, and then compare HTTPS notif with UDP notif to see what are the performance difference in there.
I would hazard a guess that it's actually worse than gRPC even.
Okay.
At least, because it's neither binary nor it's also requiring an acknowledgement per notification. So, I mean, even though it can be pipelined, but just my expectation.
Right, and also maybe here to state that the encoding is JSON, so it will obviously change when we are switching from JSON to CBOR encoding.
Yes, and also actually the HP notif draft, it's the encoding is media type defined. So currently the draft defines JSON and XML, but it is possible, I think, what you're just alluding to, for CBOR to be encoded as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you, Thomas. I know you need to move to another meeting, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And Mahesh, I think I'm up next. So are you going to be able to present my slides?
Yeah, let me try using the browser this time. And okay.
Looks good. Okay, thank you. So continuing with the client-server suite of drafts, a quick update. Since 109, the 3 lowest level drafts have been updated once. The updates were primarily around the various sector reviews that had come in. And in particular, we updated the security considerations section to detail or specify more information about the unconstrained public key usage and unconstrained private key usage. Essentially, what we mean by unconstrained here is typically certificates, X59 certificates have the notion of a key usage. So you can say if it's signing only or encryption only, or so currently the keys that are in the key store are unconstrained. There's no attribute associated with them, at least when in the raw form. When the keys are in an alternate form, then such attributes can be associated with them. And the other form being the one asymmetric key and the one symmetric key, those other ASN.1 formats that are possible. Also, we updated the encryption strategy, the one that was there. So this is how a key can encrypt another key. And the strategy that was previously specified was not implementable, to say it nicely. Jürgen pointed it out in his Yang Doctor review, which was sort of beyond the scope of what a Yang Doctor would be expected to do, but nonetheless appreciated that he discovered a gap. And then I conferred with Russ Housley, who is a security expert, and over the course of a couple weeks managed to come up with a solution that actually I shouldn't say is difficult, but it was really just an issue of logistics and us coordinating the time to talk about it. But the current solution is definitely implementable. Also, we added a password grouping example to the cryptotypes usage example. It wasn't there before, so now that example in the draft, the cryptotypes draft, is complete. So each of the possible groupings that are defined in the draft are now having a representation in that example. And we added an encrypting password section to the security consideration section, so that whole section was missing before. And of course, the Yang Doctor, other Yang Doctor reviews comments were addressed. For both trust anchors and Keystore, the same kind of update into their security considerations with regards to the unconstrained public/private key usage, and also other comments that were affected by the Yang Doctor review. Next slide, please. And then effective, really, for the remainder of the drafts, all of them, there was a sort of collateral damage, or, you know, that they all had comments. They were all modified in ways that were addressing comments raised by the Yang Doctor reviews in the cryptotype trust store and Keystore drafts. But special to just the HTTP client server draft, there was also there was a note that was dangling in the Yang module, and that got removed because we discussed it as a working group in the 108 session and resolved that issue. So that note got removed. Next slide, please. And the last slide. Okay, so I should say the chairs requested early sector reviews for these 3 lower level drafts, cryptotypes, trust anchors, and Keystore. So far, we've only actually received the sector reviews for the latter 2. We never actually received a sector review for cryptotypes itself. And so we're kind of wondering if this is an issue. And so potentially it's not an issue. And the reason why is because in order to review the trust store or the Keystore drafts, it requires or entails understanding the cryptotypes draft. So those the cryptotypes draft was sort of implicitly reviewed in part. And also because the cryptotypes draft, as I just mentioned, Russ Housley worked with me closely. He used to be AD of the security area, so he was deep in the weeds with me on the cryptotypes draft. So I think that it's pretty solid from his perspective. And then lastly, recall that the only reason we do early sector reviews is to hope, to sort of hedge our bets so that it'll more likely get through the ISG last call review. when it's published to the ISG, and of course they will at that time do a sector, or not, it's not even sector at that time, they will do a security review. So I think the fact that the cryptotext draft did not actually obtain an early sector review is not a blocker of any sort, and we should proceed with that. Any comments on that before moving to the next item? Okay, well then, oh, sorry, go ahead. Do I need to, Rob, I see that. Yeah, okay, I hear you. Okay, good, go ahead.
So just going to question on this. I think what you're proposing makes sense to me. But the only question is, if any issues came up with crypto types during ISG review or a sector review before that, would that have any impact on the other drafts?
Absolutely possible, but mind you that at least from a working group strategy, well, the next bullet point is we plan to move the remainder of the drafts into working group last call, and the chairs think that it would make sense for you as AD to sort of hold off publishing the group of drafts to ISG until they've all been collected, and then publish them together. So if we were to publish the cryptotext draft, it would really just be in your queue, and if necessary, we could pull it out and work on it some more.
Okay, that all sounds fine. Yep, makes sense to me.
Okay,
thanks.
Great. And then sort of completing that second bullet point, as just stated, and also in the agenda slide, Mahesh stated, we do plan to initiate the working group last call on the remaining drafts. Mahesh, if it's easy for you to do, maybe the slide that shows, I guess is the title slide, the first slide that has all the list of drafts, but there is a question of if we do all the drafts in one go, so there's a total of 6 drafts, or if we break them up into 2 chunks or 3 chunks perhaps. But if we were to do 2 chunks, you could imagine TCP, SSH, TLS, and HTTP all being together, and then as a second tranche, the Netconf and RESTconf drafts, or do them all together and in one go. And so what I'll say is that the first 4 drafts are like each other in the sense that they're all kind of transport oriented, and they provide groupings that are ultimately used by the Netconf and RESTconf drafts. And of course, the Netconf and RESTconf drafts are the ones that are providing the final, not only just groupings, but containers that we're using to configure Netconf and RESTconf clients and servers. So really, there is an open question to the work group. What would you prefer in terms of running these in 2 or 3 tranches or all together?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it makes sense to break it up into the 4 drafts before sending Netconf and RESTconf into last call. But I'm more than happy to hear what the work group thinks. All right.
Go ahead, Rob.
So just as an individual, I also agree with what Mahesh is saying here. I think it would make sense to try and focus on those 4 drafts first, the TCP, SSH, TLS, and HTTP, but still allow comments to go into the other drafts if that came up in that discussion. So maybe try those 4 first, and if it looks like the other 2 are required, then maybe bring them in later, but try to do it in 2 steps might get better reviews, I think. That's just an opinion.
Yep. And also, just to add to that, those 4 drafts were relatively smaller than the Netconf and RESTconf drafts, but the Netconf and RESTconf drafts are highly similar. So anyway, okay, good. Let's do that, as that'll be our plan. And so we'll plan. The chairs will plan to kick off the first 4 drafts, the work group last call, after this IETF 110. And with that, I think it concludes my presentation. Are there any other open questions or comments? And Mahesh, if you could quit screen share, I'll start the next for the next presentation.
Okay, it's all yours.
Thank you.
key in. All right, there it is. All right, so I'll talk about the update to the HTTPS-based transport for Yang notifications. Next slide, please. So we did a couple of updates coming up to 08 to try to address the working group last call comments that we received. So we did get a lot of comments, so thank everyone. I'll talk a little bit about the resource URLs that had a few questions, and same thing with discovery of receiver resources. And then I'll conclude by providing some clarification around the receiver publisher interaction, followed by any changes, not any, but the changes that we have made in the INA consideration section. Next slide. All right. So as far as the resource URL is concerned, there were a couple of questions on what was the path that we were referring to. So path is this configured resource that the publisher needs to know upfront. And I give an example here. In this case, if the configured path is some path, then with respect to that, there will be two resources that are exposed to the publisher by the receiver. One is the capabilities resource, which publisher can do a GET request on. So its path in that case would look like a GET / some path / capabilities, where the receiver is able to publish its set of capabilities. And then the second resource URL that is exposed on that same path is the relay notification resource, which is where a publisher would post the notifications that it wants to. Next slide. So in order to discover the receiver capabilities, as I mentioned, of course, the publisher would issue a GET request. And if the receiver has, say, requested, sorry, if the publisher has requested both XML and JSON, and the receiver supports XML, then you will get the response on the left. If the receiver only supports JSON, it'll send back a JSON response on the right, that you see on the right side of the screen. The response is very similar. Basically, it's publishing a set of capabilities. And say if it supports all the capabilities that we talk about in the draft, then what it should get back are those three capabilities that you see: an encoding for JSON, an encoding for XML, and an encoding, and the RFC 8639 enabled capability. So those three capabilities would be published by the receiver. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about those receiver capabilities, what they are. So we did introduce a new capability, the RFC 8639 capability, which essentially indicates support for RFC 8639 state machines. So anything that falls under what that RFC describes is what would be supported by the receiver. If it advertises the XML capability, it's basically indicating support for notifications in XML format. And if it advertises JSON, then of course it's saying that I'm capable of receiving notifications in JSON. The point to note here is that, and this is this change where we were talking about notification messages, now can go ahead and add support for something like bundled messages by essentially advertising that particular capability in their own draft in the same INR consideration section that I'll talk a little bit about later. And by advertising, now the receiver can support or show support for bundled messages. Next slide, please. So you would notice that with the latest version of the draft, we have trimmed down the diagrams and focus really on this very simple interaction of how notifications are sent. It's a one-way message as described in 7950. However, HTTP, of course, by default requires a response. So hence, this document has defined a 204 no content response that HTTP would send back every time a notification is sent. However, other responses are also possible, as is the case with if there's an authentication failure for one not authorized. So the question, I think, to the work group really is, do they prefer to see us trying to define the remaining HTTP responses that should be accepted or not accepted, or should be sent or not sent by the receiver in response to a notification? We have currently left it to that we only define what is needed, which is the 204. So that's an open question. If anyone has any comments, feel free to go ahead and comment either here or on the mailing list. And I see Rob.
As a contributor, what other codes would you think about defining? So are there some standard ones you'd expect to define, or?
Yeah, so we, both Kent and I have looked at it. We don't believe that any others need to be documented per se in our draft. And I don't know, Kent, I don't think so there's any else that we expect by default from.
Right. Yeah. So Rob said, what would we think to define? So to be clear, we're not going to define anything. It's only a matter of what other codes might be used, because HTTP is an existing standard, and any of the existing possible HTTP responses could be returned, such as on screen you see 401 not authorized. There's also others like resource not available, or there's, I don't know, that it's possible. It seems to me that a publisher, an HTTP as notive publisher, would have to be effectively an HTTP client. I mean, it is an HTTP client, and it would have to be capable of handling the various kinds of HTTP responses that would come back. Of course, the expectation is none of those other responses would come back, but they might, and we can't prevent it, I don't think, in this draft. So we're just sort of, it's not, I think what Mahesh's point is to what extent should this draft go to making that statement, and perhaps even further trying to indicate under like every possible response or known HTTP response code what it might mean, or how it could be, I mean, if there's any semantic, behavioral impact above and beyond what HTTP defines. I don't think so, but I think that's what Mahesh is leading up to.
So I think my question is, what's the publisher expected to do if they get different codes? Are they expected to write different handling for those, or are they meant to handle them all the same way?
Well, I would imagine that the handling would be done by the HTTP client itself, and that I think the response would really be at that level from a implementation for this particular draft perspective, I don't think so. There's anything that the draft is guiding towards in terms of response. It's whatever the HTTP client.
Well, maybe to Rob's point, because so if you look at HTTP status codes, they're grouped into categories. So there's the 1 XX and the 2 XX, 3 XX, 4 XX, 5 XX. So 4 XX is client errors and 5 XX is server side errors. So client error, like 401 not authorized. I mean, that's something a client would, I think it's pretty much on the onus of the client, or shall we say the publisher, to handle any and all possible client errors. From a server error perspective, for instance, maybe the backend database that the server is writing into is full, and it can't persist the log, or for something like that. I don't know. And for some reason or another, it returns a 5XX type error to the client, effectively saying, I'm not able to process this request. What would the client do in that, or should the publisher do in that instance? And maybe what you're suggesting is, does that entail buffering on the client, until as and when it's able to deliver that message or something like that? Is that what you're thinking the draft should go into that level of detail?
No, not necessarily. I think my question is more is if there is some defined behavior that a client's expected to take, or publisher, I'm confused which way around this is, then that's worth specifying. If they handle it all the same way regardless, or if that's already been specified elsewhere, then I don't think it needs to be restated here. So I guess it's worth specifying if some action needs to be taken, otherwise not.
Okay.
Well, I think, as an author, I think it makes sense for us to state that for any of the server errors, the 5XX category of errors, this draft is not itself defining the need for any buffering to occur.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
All right. Next slide. All right, I think I believe the next slide, which can scroll into, yes, is the INI consideration section. So we did modify the INI consideration section. We, of course, have the registry to register the Yang model, but now a new registry has been added to define the capability URN that we talked about a couple of slides ago. And of course, it's been initialized with the 3 URNs, the 3 capabilities that we talked about a couple of slides ago. So that's the change as far as the INI consideration section is concerned. We do have some outstanding comments that we will, the authors, Kent and I, will respond to after this meeting to address the remaining last call comments. But at that point, I believe we would have addressed any and all remaining comments. So that's as far as the status of this draft is concerned. Any other comments or questions? All right. If not, then we can get to the next item.
Sure. And Mahesh, as a contributor, I just noticed that the encoding, sorry, the URN for the 8639 encoding, I'm sorry, supported that the URN actually used the word encoding into it. It's not actually an encoding, so we should change the title of that URN. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's bring up the next presentation, and just do like that. All right. Okay, here we go. Can you?
All right, looks good.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Yes.
But I can't see this. Oh, okay, I see the slides. Okay, hello. This is Peng Liu from China Mobile, and I'd like to introduce the draft of telemetry data export capability. Next slide, please. Okay, so I can't see the slide change. Maybe network has some problem. So is it slides too?
It's on the recap slide, but you're right. I think there's a
Oh,
delay.
okay.
You're seeing it.
Let's have a recap first. The motivation is that the notification capability model defined in the Netconf notification capabilities allow a client to discover a set of capabilities, such as transport independent session level supported by the server. But some transport specific parameters are lacked, such as transport protocol encoding format and encryption. So the goal of data export capability is to augment system capabilities model and provide additional data export attributes for transport-dependent capability negotiation. Next slide, please. Okay, this draft was second presented in the last meeting, and a few issues were discussed. First is to support multiple transport protocols, advertisement from the server to the client. Second is whether to insert hints into error response described in the RFC 8639, which will be introduced later. The latest version is version 3, and changes compared to the previous versions are first, we change data export capabilities into list type to support multiple transport protocol encoding on the server. And second is adding usage example of interaction with UDP-based transport for configured subscription, which can be found in the appendix in the draft. And third, we add Thomas as a contributor. And fourth, we update motivation in the introduction to clarify why this work is needed. It is because unguaranteed of inserting hints into error response. So this document defines a corresponding solution that is built on top capability of the existing draft Netconf notification capabilities. And finally, we add the support UDP and HTTP notification as two optional transport in the YARN data model. Next slide, please. So here are two issues need to be clarified. First is multiple transport protocol support. We got a question that in some cases the server may support multiple transport protocols. So how does the server advertise multiple transport protocol support to the client? We give an example. Both UDP and HTTP notification are supported by the server. So we propose that change data export capabilities from container type to the list type to support multiple transport protocols. And with this transport protocol capability advertisement, the client know which transport protocol is needed to specify in the established subscription RPC or modify subscription RPC. Next slide, please. Okay. So, another issue is inserting hints into error response. As described in the section 3.1 of the existing RFC, simple negotiation, for example, inserting hints into error response to a field RPC request between subscribers and publishers for subscription parameters increase the likelihood of success for subsequent RPC requests, but not guaranteed, which may cause unexpected failure or additional message exchange between the client and server. So introduce telemetry transport capability advertisement, increase likelihood of success of the first RPC request, and reduce the number of subscription message to be exchanged between them. But at the cost of introducing advertisement message before the Netconf or RESTconf session is established. So next slide, please. So we'll address any comments receiving in the meeting, and can we request co-adoption on this document and any comments?
Go ahead, Tim.
Hi, yes. So this is Tim Carey. I do have a question regarding just if everything was taken care of. I saw that you did look at the multiple transports encoding situation where you had one before that was brought up by, I believe, Rob on the last meeting, but there was also some outstanding issues with respect to the adoption of this thing and discussions that were happening through the online email. Were those issues resolved regarding specifically the complexity and whether it was really needed and some of the unnecessary subscription exchange? I didn't see anything in there that was resolved or not. Could you comment on that?
Hi, team. This is Qing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. Let me clarify a little bit. Actually, we discussed two issues. For second issue, actually, you mentioned by this brought up by the robot, we have already addressed to support multiple transport protocol and encoding. For the first issue, actually, we also discuss the existing solutions that be proposed in Yangpuqi RFC. Actually, it is actually insert error response into the response message. Actually, we maybe we can go back a little bit. The first issue, actually, we can take a look at that. Yeah. So we verify this. Oh, not this one. The second, the issue 2. Sorry. Yeah. So existing solution is to insert hint into the error message, error response actually, but we think it may cause some of it actually may not guarantee to be successful for the second round RPC request. So if we can introduce this capability advertisement, so for the first RPC actually we increase the likelihood of success, but we verify for this actually you have some cost you need to sacrifice because you also need to introduce this advertisement message, but this message actually we based on the young push notification that has already been standard in be discussed in the Netconf. Actually, this is a cost we should sacrifice, but we also have benefit increase the likelihood of success for the first IPC request. So this is something we discuss and also clarify in the introduction section and for the motivation. So we think it address this issue. Also, we post the draft for on the list and for working group review, and haven't seen any objection. Yeah.
But did you
answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure. But did you directly go back to? I think it was Andy that had these objections before. Did you go back and verify the solution with Andy, who had the direct question? or concern?
We haven't get feedback on the list publicly for
Okay.
this, but we did post this update and mention which address this issue on the list. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Tim, what I think we as chairs can do is we can ask Andy specifically if his issues have been addressed or not.
Yeah, that's all. I just had that documented from last time, was that there was some concerns still, and I just wanted to make sure that you know, that the people's direct concerns were validated with the people that made those concerns.
Okay.
Yeah, makes
So
sense.
Chin,
Thank you. Yeah.
so Chin, I had a
Yeah, Mahesh.
question.
Yeah.
So for the first issue that you talk about, where you want to support, so what is the scenario in which a publisher might want to choose between different transport mechanisms at the time, learn the capabilities, and then choose? Generally, wouldn't the publisher already know which kind of transport it wants to use?
Yeah, this is something we also, discuss about your job, the HTTP notif. We think, you can discover the receiver capability. For us, actually, the server also can advertise their capability. So, so this capability advertisement can be leveraged by the Yang push subscription. For example, you establish a subscription, you need to decide what kind of encoding you should choose, or what kind of transport you want to select, and you can leverage this capability advertisement from the server. Yeah, that's our scenario.
Okay.
This is Kent as a contributor. Jen, you just mentioned established subscription. I know that that is a notification, a Yang notification statement defined in Yang push, I think. But when using, for instance, the HTTPS notif draft, these are one-way messages. It's a one-way flow of messages. There's no response. I know we were talking earlier about HTTP status codes and 4XX and 5XX type responses, but there's actually no application level response, like containing a payload that the receiver could communicate anything to the publisher. Is that in any way a concern or an issue with regards to this work?
Yeah, I think both work has such a limitation. Actually, is a one-way message actually, but I think we talk with Thomas because they have a UDP notif. Actually, they really want to better understand what a server support for the encoding, so they can leverage this server advertisement for the encoding. So I think not a concern. From my side, actually, I'm not sure we really want to define, two-way message to address this. I think just like Yang push notification, this is just a one-way message. This is a foundation we can leverage. Yeah.
And I know Thomas isn't on the call anymore, but it does seem that the UDP notif and for that matter, any other future transport notif that we might define, that they would want, I think, follow the pattern that the HTTPS notif draft is using, whereby there's a something like a get capabilities, which for the case of UDP notif would have to be probably a TCP oriented request. Perhaps, I mean, that could be discussed, but then the actual flow of notifications begins using UDP. But so, I mean, that kind of makes sense, and something I would expect to be defined inside the UDP notif draft as being part of that work. Is it then would that then be an overlap with what you're describing here?
No, actually, we did discuss with Thomas, about this. Actually, we actually, so for UDF Notive, actually, they can leverage the mechanism defined in this draft to do the, server capability discovery. Actually, I think there's no overlap, and either UDF Notive reference this draft or this draft reference UDP notif. I'm okay with this.
Then does that then beg the question of if the HTTPS notif should not define the get capabilities resource and instead point to this draft?
Yeah, that's one option actually. I think yeah, I haven't thought about this issue actually. I think we can talk about this how to leverage this server capability. I think your maximum in actually notif actually they provide the receiver discovery, and so this is something we I haven't think about this issue. Maybe yeah, uh, I will take a look at this. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
I mean,
and
as you know,
right.
we're near the working group last call on that draft, and but I mean, as a contributor, I think that it makes sense for each node of transport to define its own mechanism for how it would discover the capabilities of the receiver. But I don't know if it, okay, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Any other comments from anybody? Okay, Tim.
But just to follow up on Kent's question, right? So if you don't do that, Kent, then what's the value of this draft? If the other drafts would define their own mechanisms. Did I miss something here, Kent?
No, well, I mean, that is the question and why I asked him, but the response was not solid. And so it makes me question if, it seems like we want to go all one way or all the other way, right? But my intuition is that we'd that it makes it, like, for instance, with the HTTPS, the HTTPS notif draft, the mechanism that's used to get the capabilities is HTTPS, and it's it's kind of baked into that protocol. If you were to do, for instance, a gRPC notif, you would probably use a gRPC request. If you're using, so for each transport, there'd be a transport oriented way about going about, learning the capabilities. So my intuition is that we'd probably want maybe to have allow each transport to have its own to define its own mechanism for doing that. But so that's the quandary, I guess, where I'm at right now.
And to that, I'll add that what if a particular new transport draft comes along and wants to define a new capability? Do we then rev this particular draft to add that new capability at that point?
Yeah, I think for our job, right now we support UDP notif and HTTP notif. If there's new transport, we can add it actually in as a one option, no problem.
As chair, I see that Benoit's posted something to the chat window, but Benoit, I don't actually understand exactly what you're saying. Do you think you could speak to the mic? Oh, okay, go ahead, Benoit. I don't hear Benoit. Maybe he's on mute locally. Robert, I see that you're also in queue. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, yes, as a contributor, I think this is an interesting question more generally about how we manage capabilities of servers and how those are reported and exported. I think that at the moment, it seems like there's different approaches to that problem. And certainly, I think it's probably worth having some further discussion to find one way to do this. I have the concern, you know, as you say, you got your draft of work group last call at the moment. That's defining one mechanism. But if we decide to do it a different way, then that's a potential issue. But it does feel to me that we should come up with a common solution to this rather than doing it differently for different sorts of capabilities.
One thing I'll note is in RFC 8639, in the configured descriptions Yang module, for each subscriber, for each description, there's a leaf called encoding, which is an identity ref, and defined values are XML and JSON. The description statement for that leaf says that, and I should note that that leaf is under a when statement. And so whichever draft is defining the identity can choose as to whether or not, whenever a draft is defining a transport, such as HTTPS notif, it can choose as to whether or not that leaf is configurable. If it's even visible, the when statement will disable the presence of that leaf, the encoding leaf, if not there. So this was discussed some by the authors, and it seemed that the statically configuring the encoding XML versus JSON was less desirable than a dynamically learned response that you could obtain from the the receiver, what encodings it supports that way, and then have a more dynamic response. So the HTTPS notif draft does not, when it goes to define that identity, it does not do it in a way that enables the when statement, and hence the configurability of that encoding leaf is not possible when using the HTTPS notif transport. But then further on, I mean, so we could suss the details out of that, but also note that there's other capabilities above and beyond those of just encoding, like if the encoding is JSON versus XML. Or there's also, for instance, as defined in our draft already, if you support the 8639 state machine, potentially there could be also if you support bundled messages, headers, and things like that. So there's a multiplicity of kinds of capabilities that are beyond the scope of encodings. So I'm not really taking away from what you've just said, Robert. I'm just adding more context to it. Go ahead.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's the key point to me, is that in terms of capabilities, we have one base capabilities draft and we have another one adding some extra color to that. But there's a whole scope of capabilities that a device has in terms of configuration and what it's doing, things like that. And I wonder whether we need to have a more holistic view of all those capabilities and work out what the best way of expressing those is in Yang. I just worry that we're sort of taking a piecemeal approach here. We've got some base capabilities, we've got some that are extending it for telemetry. We've got the notice drafts and things that are doing their own capabilities. I'm wondering whether we should have a look at trying to work out what the solution to the entire space is, rather than solving each bit independently, is what I was thinking of.
Okay, so Kent, actually, when I look at Bino's comment, what he's saying is that he actually agrees with you that it makes sense to have discover capability. So the approach that, say, the HTTPS notif draft has taken, and I think Bino can speak for himself, so I'll let him do it, but that's my interpretation. Go ahead, Bino.
Right, so it's exactly my view, right? So, okay, we're defining netconf and RESTconf and notifications, right? But trying to get, and this, I want to react to what you said as the last sentence, Kent, maybe 3 or 5 minutes ago, telling it's important to have discovery capabilities, right? And it's important for telemetry, for transport, and a draft that Rob mentioned too, for object as well. So I don't want to position myself one holistic view or not, but I'm just stressing whenever we want to solve the next step of network management is intent assurance. We need to rely on those capabilities, and maybe it makes sense to have a holistic view, but I'm just saying that we're going to see more and more of those capabilities discovery, I guess.
So as a contributor, I think I understand, or that dynamic discovery is preferred over static discovery, is what I think you're saying. But the mechanism for dynamic discovery, holistic versus per node of transport, that's something that we should probably look at more deeply. Is that correct, Benoit?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, I think we've completed this draft's presentation. And unless there's any other comments, I'm going to start bringing up the next slides.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you
We
hear
can
me?
hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Could you please open the slides?
Yeah. So Kent is trying to bring up the slides.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. This is Chufama, and I'm here to present our draft adaptive subscription to Young notification. Next slide, please. To give a recap here, Young Push has defined the two subscription modes, periodic and on-change subscription. However, in some cases, there is a need for a service to configure both collectors and publishers with multiple period intervals and automatically switch to different period intervals according to resource usage. For example, thinking about a wireless network performance case, when the wireless signal stress falls below a configured low watermark, the subscribed data can be streamed at a higher rate. However, when the wireless signal stress crosses a configured high watermark, the subscribed data can be streamed at a lower rate. For the first case, we think that we would like the data to be streamed at a higher rate so that we can get enough telemetry data to detect and diagnose the network problem. But in the second case, we would like the telemetry data to be streamed at a lower rate so as to save network resources like bandwidth. Therefore, we propose a new subscription mode. And we also define a young data model and associated mechanism to enable subscribers adaptive subscription and allow publisher to automatically adjust the volume of telemetry traffic. Next slide, please. Regarding document status, this is our third time to present this work. And in the IETF 109 meeting, we clarify the relation between this work and ECA, and a common understanding has been reached. But still, we have two issues raised during the IETF 109 meeting. Is there any alternative solution, and how client-initiated or modified subscription is different from this work? Regarding the second issue, many thanks to Thomas for arranging the meeting after the IETF 109 so that we can reach an agreement with the proposed changes. The recent progress we have made is reflected on the latest update version 3. We clarify the differences between low priority telemetry data dropping and collection rate switching in the introduction session, and update the abstract and the introduction session to focus on collection rate switching in the server without interaction with the remote client, and other editorial changes. Next slide, please. Our main idea here is that when the data collection rate is too high, it becomes more likely that a burst of stream data may temporarily overwhelm a receiver and consume expensive network resource. But when the rate at which we can collect a stream of data is set too low, these telemetry data are not sufficient to detect and diagnose problems and verify correct network behavior. An alternative solution is to prioritize the telemetry data collection and get lower priority telemetry data dropped. It uses fixed telemetry data collection rate or fixed update interval. However, it is not sufficient to detect and diagnose the problems and verifying correct network behavior. And another alternative is to use client-initiated established subscription or modified subscription RPC. We think that it has slow response to the network condition change. The current established subscription RPC does not support the update interval switching. So you have to do the augment established subscription RPC to allow the client to switch the update interval. So in a nutshell, we think that this issue has been resolved in the current version. Next slide, please. The key values of adaptive subscription is that it addresses performance bottleneck on the device when facing massive data collection and process. And it also automatically adjusts the volume of telemetry traffic sent from publisher to the receiver. And it greatly reduces the amount of data to be exported. The authors believe that this draft has been ready to move forward. So we would like here to request the adoption call. Any comments?
Hi, this is Kent as a contributor. I'm wondering about your previous issue, and since I'm driving the slides, I'll just scroll back up to it. You mentioned that the alternative solution point number, the second bullet point, is to use client-initiated established subscription, modified subscription RPCs. So in the case of the HTTPS notif or the UDP notif drafts, both of which are effectively one way, are you then envisioning the receiver having a secondary connection to the server, to the publisher, so that it can then send these RPCs messages?
Yes, if it is in the two-way subscription, then the client can use the modified subscription. But in the UDP or HTTP subscription case, the client may use the established subscription, but it needs to change the augment the RPC to allow the client to switch the update interval.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Just saying that slightly different. Sorry, just 1 second, Chen. Just saying that we're repeating back. When it's a dynamic subscription, that's when the receiver is already a RESTconf or Netconf client and it's connecting and then effectively over the existing Netconf or RESTconf connection, it starts to receive the flow of notifications, then of course it makes sense to send these established modified subscription messages over that. But when it's a configured subscription, so the flow of logs or notifications are occurring out the back end, there need to be a secondary Netconf and RESTconf connection on the top side in order to affect the changes. That's my understanding.
Yeah, Ken, you are correct. Actually, I just want to clarify for more dynamic subscription. Actually, we're not proposed to have a second connection. We still use the existing connection actually, but you can use modify subscription to change some of parameters, still maintain the same connection. But for configure subscription, I agree with you.
So, sorry, I'm just thinking about this. So some of the publisher is aware of some of the issues of congestion related to, for instance, if the TCP write buffer is overflowing, that's an indication of a problem. Potentially also the receiver could become aware of some issues if there are sequence numbers and it can see that messages are dropping, which would probably be an issue more on the for UDP. Because other transports are TCP based, and so if anything were to drop, the publisher would be aware of it. But then that suggests that the receiver has some backend ability to communicate with the orchestrator in order to send the messages, the modify subscription message down to the publisher to modify that subscription. I'm just thinking about the round tripping of it. I'm thinking out loud, just making sure it makes sense. Is that what you're envisioning as well?
Yeah,
each configured subscription, there'd have to be a way for the receiver to communicate back to the publisher.
Yeah, so right now for server actually, if it automatically switches the data connection rate, it will send the notification. Actually, we define the notification to inform the receiver about the data connection rate change. Actually, this is what we have in the current draft. If you think, do you think additional capability that is needed?
No, not necessarily. I just want to make sure my understanding is correct.
Yeah, your understanding is correct. I think we, if there's any issue for the mechanism we propose, we can definitely address that. But right now I didn't see some issue on this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mahesh, I see that you have you're going to make a comment. Can I open up the next slides?
Yeah, you can go. Actually, I just had one question with a share hat on. The authors suggested that they were having conversations with Thomas on this draft. And that's great that you have that interaction. But I would recommend that the authors post their questions and or whatever discussions they're having to the mailing list also, so that other participants can pitch in and help contribute. That I think it'll help you guys in the end. So it'll be good to be able to have that discussion on the mailing list. That's just my recommendation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, we can make a summary and send to the list. We already discussed with Thomas about this, and probably some of the conclusion. Actually, we can make a summary. Yeah, and share on the list. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, then I'd like to discuss another draft with system compatibility for Netconf. Next slide, please. Let's talk about the
Shafan, I'm sorry, I just killed your audio. Can you reconnect your audio? Oh, sorry, not Shafan, but Chaman. Oh no.
Lose her completely?
No, she's coming back.
Okay.
Okay, she's back. Sorry about that.
Okay, let's continue.
Thank
Let's
you.
talk about the motivation and goal. As we all know, RFC 6243 has defined the default data handling behavior, and it includes data retrieval and create or delete operation. However, when talking about system configuration, before MDA is introduced, different vendors have different solutions. System configuration data can be located anywhere in the device, and there is no standard behavior for system data handling. After NFDA is introduced, system configuration is defined in the MDA draft as the configuration that is supplied by the device itself, and it should be present in operational data store. But the issue is that when the client references the system configuration, or the system configuration is in the when or must statement, an error will be reported because of the reference data object does not exist. So weak reference may be a choice, but it has its limitation. Otherwise, you have to retrieve that referenced system configuration from operational and put it into running data store. But when system configuration gets updated, there is no standard mechanism to synchronize the data into running, and the client cannot detect the update automatically. So that's the motivation of this work. Our goal here is to resolve this issue and define a standard system configuration data handling behavior. Next slide, please. So here is our solution overview. We introduce a new data store named system. It is read-only and it does not have to persist across reboots. At each boot time, the device generates system configuration in system data store. We also define two basic modes, report all and explicit. Running is automatically synced up with system in the report all basic mode. For example, system configuration is automatically loaded into running when the device is powered on or the physical resource is present. On the contrary, a server using explicit basic mode will not update running with system automatically. In addition, two data handling behaviors is defined. Next slide, please. So here gives the life cycle of the system configuration, and a synchronization between system and running data store can be reflected here. First diagram illustrates the initialization during reboot. When the device boots, it generates system configuration in system. Then it loads the saved startup into running. And at the time of loading startup, some special functionality may be enabled. So conditional system configuration may be created in system. Lastly, the device loads system into running in the report all basic mode. And in the second diagram, when you insert a physical resource, the corresponding system configuration will be created in system and loaded into running data store automatically in the report all basic mode. In the last one, when you remove a physical resource, corresponding system configuration will be removed from system automatically, and it does not affect running. So next slide, please. Here gives an interface data retrieval usage example. All the configuration data snippets, including system configuration, are shown in the left. And 3 types of XML responses to the GET operation with different system parameters are shown. In this example, the server's basic mode is report all. As the name of with system parameter suggests, report all means reporting all the data nodes, including data nodes, any data nodes considered to be system configuration. And explicit means reporting the dataset or modified explicitly by the client, even with the same value as the server set. And a trim parameter means reporting the data considered to be not consistent with the system configuration data set by the server. So next slide, please. Okay, regarding create and delete operation behavior, in the report all basic mode, the server will update running with system automatically. So for a data node that is loaded from system automatically, a valid create operation must fail with a data exist error tag, and a valid delete operation must succeed. On the other hand, in the explicit basic mode, any system update will not be loaded into running. So for a system configuration data node that is not explicitly set by the client, a create operation must succeed and a delete operation must fail. A valid delete operation attribute for a data node explicitly set by the client must succeed. Okay, next slide, please. One of the open issues in draft Netconf trust anchors that was previously discussed on the list is that for some built-in trust anchors, they must be forcibly copied into running in order for being referenced. And is the operation done automatically or explicitly? I think that exactly indicates the key values of our draft. Since we have avoided synchronizing into running manually when reference the system configuration, but you can still put it into running manually in the explicit basic mode. In addition, we propose a standard system configuration that handles behavior. So we would like here to collect some feedback. Is this problem worthy of discussion? And is our proposal reasonable enough? Any comments and suggestions would be much appreciated. And of course, contributions and co-authors are welcome. Okay, that's all. Thank you. Any comments?
Go ahead, Rob.
So I think this is an interesting idea. So thank you for presenting this. I think we need to be very careful that what you're proposing here doesn't break some of the axioms. This is all as a contributor, break some of the axioms that the NMDA architecture is trying to define, which is really trying to allow the running data store, or the contents of it, to be controlled by the clients, the operators, and not be modified by the device. So that was the aim of that architecture. And the sort of corollary to that is the desire to allow that configuration to be validated off the device if possible. So the aim there is to have all of the configuration that you need to get the system running available in one go. But I do acknowledge that in some cases you have the system created configuration coming to the system, it's in operation, you don't see this. So I think the idea of having a system data store is interesting, it's worth exploring, and having that feed into operational makes sense to me. The ability of it updating running automatically seems dubious to me. I'm not sure that's a good idea, and I didn't really understand how that ties in with the two different basic modes, if that was your with defaults handling or not. I think that is probably not the right approach. But you could have manual RPCs, in my mind, that copied configuration from system into running that's driven by an operator to do that and say, okay, I want you to move this over at this time. But I think we need to be very careful not to change the fundamental axioms of how the NMDA architecture is working. Otherwise, I think it will devalue that architecture.
Okay, thank you for the comment. I think our intent here is trying to maximize the convenience of the client, because the client retrieves the system configuration from operational and then put it into running manually. The operation could be complicated with low efficiency. And when the system configuration got updated, the client cannot detect it automatically, but the same updates should be reflected into running. So we think that is unreasonable that the system generates the configuration automatically, but the client needs to reconfigure it. Regarding the two basic modes, the report all basic mode will update running with the system configuration in the system data store automatically. That resolve our issue, but we still reserve the explicit basic mode is to be compatible with the existing mechanism. Because I think for some implementations, they maybe cannot afford to change a lot logical code so that they can support explicitly only.
I'll let Balazs comment.
Go ahead, Blush.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, so 3 comments. One is that we already have a RFC about a factory default configuration, which seems to somehow that should be included at least in the initialization use case. The other comment is that I don't find this using the report and explicit mode and these terminology from with defaults intuitive in this case. I think that was all really more for reporting something than for actually configuring anything. I would probably use a different terminology. And the third is that although it's not popular in our circles, but other standard organizations, for example, 3GPP, do use systems that automatically configure parts of the running configuration. It has its problems, definitely, but they do use that. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, this is Qing. Actually, to answer the question raised by the Robert Wilton, actually, he suggests maybe use RPC, but for client initiated this RPC, how the client detect the system configuration changes. So this is a challenge. So that's why we haven't think about how to use this RPC to address this issue. Yeah, thank you.
Just to reply on the RPC, a client could see that the system configurations changed if it was a data store, if it was registered for a notification of changes to that data store. So it could use a standard subscription for that if necessary.
Okay, yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tim.
if that's the case, then what is the value of system? I mean, because you can do the same thing on operational, right? You could changes off of operational on particular items that you want to potentially modify into running. So I'm kind of missing what system would provide.
In the report or basic mode, you don't have to retrieve the data from operational and then you write them into running manually.
Yes, but I was saying that if you took the approach that you weren't doing a writable running type of approach, you were doing the approach that you're similar to the approach that you're doing now, but you were the other method was to say, if I use RPCs and I use subscriptions, why wouldn't I just use the subscriptions on operational, right? And then the client would use the RPCs to write into running. You wouldn't need a system data store. That's what I was just trying to figure out, if that was true.
Just to reply to Tim, I think one difference would be that the system data would show you purely the system configuration, whereas what is in operational, it is possible that some of those system values might be overwritten with explicit configuration or other values that have come elsewhere. So what you see in operation wouldn't necessarily have all that system configuration. An example would be an interface that's created automatically because it exists, a physical interface on the device. That would live in system, but if you were using that interface, you'd have explicit configuration as well to configure the properties of that interface. So what you'd see in operational would be labeled as configuration coming from intended rather than system. So there would be a difference between what you would get. Whether that would actually matter, I don't know. As in, it may be that is not important, given that you've already configured those properties. It may be the fact that you don't see them in operational doesn't matter.
So, but in operational, don't we already have something that talks about the origin or the source of the information?
Absolutely, but I think it only returns a single value, and I can't remember if it gives a precedence to the different orderings. But I'd always imagined that if you had an interface that comes from both explicit configuration and system, that what you'd report is the explicit configuration. It seems to be of higher importance. Whereas if you were to...
I get it, Rob. I'm just we're getting a proliferation of data stores, right? just seems to me that when we add data stores, things get more complex, a lot more complex quickly.
Maybe.
Sorry, I think there is no precedence in the operational. That's an implementation issue, which is the precedence. Operational just shows whichever has won in the origin parameter.
Right. So you still have the problem of what does the two values mean, right? One in running, the other in operational, and how did it get into operational, right?
Kent, as a contributor, responding to Tim, I think that same issue was discussed / envisioned in the NMDA work with dynamic data stores. At least, there we said that if a configured value, came from the dynamic data store, then I think the origin value would specify that. But it didn't ever, if there was a multiplicity of dynamic data stores, while the collection of them were envisioned to be processed after intended, how they would be processed amongst each, the ordering amongst themselves was never defined and sort of left as future work. And it seems to me that this system data store would have to be viewed in that way as well. Any other comments? So on the last, as chair, on the last three presentations, there's been a request to discuss the adopting of the drafts. I think that they require more discussion on the list, but the chairs will discuss that and propose to the authors a course of action. And with that, I will, sorry, Jen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, we will actually, address the issue raised on the list actually for two draft, and we clarify a little bit on the list, and you can decide. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be best if we could have a discussion on the list for each of these drafts and sort of have that discussion come to a head before we initiate any sort of adoption. Thank you.
Okay.
And with that, I'll start to bring up the slides to the last presentation. Just a second.
So while Kent is trying to bring up the slides, so we wanted to take the remaining time. We had initially anticipated this finishing a little earlier, the rest of the presentation. But anyway, with the remaining 15 minutes, the topic really is about what we want to do next with RESTconf and RESTconf. So next slide, please. So this is a question, is an open forum. Feel free to jump on the queue if you want to suggest something. I don't have an ordered sequence of things that I want to go through, but there are some fundamental questions that we probably want to try to get an answer to first is, does the work group feel that the protocols have been mature, have been implemented, and maybe needs either minor tweaking or maybe a major revision? And if so, do we want to target both Netconf and RESTconf protocols for revision? And as maybe the question of deciding whether it is a minor tweak to the protocol or a major would be decided based on the issues that we decide to address. So that obviously brings up the question of what issues that we do want to address if we do want to rev the protocols. There is a list of issues. Maybe next slide, we can just flash it. So all these issues, by the way, are on GitHub. So anyone can go in there, either add to an existing issue or add a new one if they feel the existing set doesn't address their issue. And similarly, there is a RESTconf next set of issues on the last slide. So back to the question to the working group. Oh, there's a corrected URL, I guess. It's not. Next is Netconf. Anyway. So the question back to the working group and is, does the working group feel that these protocols are ripe for a revision? And I'll pause there to see if anyone has any comments.
Hi, Mahesh, as a contributor and also as presenter, I'm just going to move to the next slide so people can at least see that slide while we're having this conversation. There are some RESTconf next issues as well. So as a contributor, I'm aware of the fact that NetMod Working Group also has a Yang Next tracker. And with a desire, I think there's over 100 issues that are being tracked there over, for the past 3 or 4 years now. It's probably getting ready for some work to be initiated. So to what extent, if would these protocols, should they, any update to them to be deferred until that effort in NetMod has resolved, or at least has kicked off, so there's more visibility into what it looks like?
Yes, I mean, there would be, I guess, some follower from whatever Yang Next decides to address, when they decide to address Yang Next. I think there is at least one item maybe in the RESCONF, not in the RESCONF, in the next set of issues that has to do with, I think if you bring up that slide, has to do with cleanup of the specification relative to Yang/XML. So we do allude to what we do know as it exists in the Yang RFC, but we don't know, of course, what will Yang Next might bring. But I think there is a larger issue which probably has to do with Quick as a transport. So I know Rob wanted to particularly highlight that, so I'll let him speak to the question of what impact Quick might have on both the protocols. Rob?
Yes, I was hoping to hear more input from other participants in the working group. I'll just let you know my thoughts as a participant. So first about Quick, that's pretty much, it's through the ISG now, and I think it's on its way to the RFC editor. I don't think it's quite got through there yet. But Quick is the new version of TCP in essence, along with TLS, and it does have some features that may be of interest to us for Netconf, in particular to do with telemetry. The fact that it allows sessions to be set up more easily, and it allows separate streams to be carried within the same protocol session. So I think it's certainly worth thinking about Quick, whether that is useful for Netconf, and correspondingly HTTP3, which is the same as HTTP2 but over Quick for RESTconf. In my mind, the question as to whether we should concentrate on one protocol or the other, I think that they both have different goals that they are serving, and hence I think it makes sense to try and work on both of them over time. I don't know whether this is the right time or not, but I do think that it's potentially worth looking at to see if it's now time to consider evolving these protocols. But I'm keen for feedback from others if possible.
Go ahead, Binwa. So, Binwa, we not able to hear you.
Okay, is this better now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Mahesh. So there are plenty of features, right? And I see them on the two links that you shared, right? I see JSON encoding support on Netconf. Great. There are plenty of things you could be doing, but what would be interesting is to understand if all these features are coming from real operators, right? And if that be the case, then it means that we know what to work on, because these are pain points in developing all new features that they want. This is what I would be interested to understand. I know it's a tough task, right? But operators' feedback first, no?
Agree. And if there are any operators in this meeting right now, I would love to get their input.
Right, as a contributor, this is Kent. I was thinking the same thing. Like, if I mean, at least as I'm aware, I don't know of any pain points that are being expressed by operators. Exactly, I mean, we have a certain number of drafts that we've are in flight, right? Some that are chartered and some that are not yet chartered. For instance, the list pagination work is something that's been discussed and it's been highlighted as a pain point of sorts. But for that draft and others that are in progress, they are updating existing Netconf, ResConf RFCs as opposed to replacing them with BIZs. And so I would hope that maybe, we could continue doing that. I don't know if that's possible with Quick, if that would necessitate a BIZ of the RFCs, or if it's possible to do as an update. But I guess the point I'm making is if there were, very specific pain points, as Benoit points out, we could possibly address them as updates to existing RFCs as opposed to creating new RFCs.
Go ahead, Tom.
Just to respond to your question, Kent, on Quick. Certainly there is a draft in the Quick working group for doing Netconf over Quick, but I presume that is merely doing exactly what it does today, but with just Quick as the underlying transport. As in, I'm not sure you potentially are making, it would allow Netconf or telemetry to be making use of the new capabilities of Quick, or it's just a standard, use this as the transport. So so that what you're proposing is these point updates, maybe that's possible, I don't know, it's worth investigating. I do wonder whether there's, when it gets to a large enough set of them, whether you need to do something that's a bigger change. And again, the other one I think on there is things like the binary encoding. I think that Mahesh had a go at doing that, but it looked like it was getting a bit tricky, I guess, to do that as an update. So I don't know if it sort of stops some of this work happening. I completely agree with Benoit that getting feedback from the operators as to what they need is important as well.
And one, I see Tim in the queue, but quickly responding to Rob, one thing that occurs to me is that, if you're going over Quick, that might necessitate allocating a new port. Currently, ResConf servers and Netconf servers have dedicated ports, so perhaps a different port would need to be used. Go ahead, Tim. Tim, did you have a comment?
Sorry, I was speaking to mute. So for a couple other standards bodies that we're currently working with and having discussions with operators as well on certain features, we constantly or we come up against questions about the utilization of Yang with gRPC and GPB, right? In fact, I had some discussions earlier this morning with an operator on a topic, or a couple of operators on a topic with that, right? So I don't know if that fits into a ResConf type of transport binding and encoding, or if that's its own, you got ResConf, Netconf, and something else conf, right? gRPC conf or something like that. I don't know. But it's interesting that, particularly as we get into telemetry or we get into control plane, relay, and we want to utilize Yang as a way of conveying, the semantics of the data model. Effectively, the data model. It's gRPC and GPB as a way of encoding it is becoming more and more acceptable, right? And so I'm not quite sure what that means in terms of Netconf and ResConf. If that's just a binding or if that's a new protocol.
Okay. So since we're coming up to the end of the meeting, let me just quickly summarize what I understand of the comments that we have received till now. I absolutely agree with Benoit as far as, again, trying to get more operator input in trying to decide what are the issues that we want to try to address. Maybe that will, of course, decide whether we have both the protocols or just one of them, and what are the features we try to address as part of that. But I think Rob's point about the fact that the Quick protocol itself might necessitate a rev for both the protocols is an important consideration to have. It's not something we can decide to ignore for some period of time, but I think if adoptions go ahead as they are for quick, then we might come back and have to look at saying what it takes to, what changes would be needed for RESTconf and next Netconf. But so that's my observation based on the comments that I've seen till now. So we can continue the discussion on the mailing list. Unless anyone has anything else they want to add. Okay. So we are at the end of the hour and the end of the meeting. Thank you, everyone. We will be posting the minutes of the meeting once Kent and I have had a chance to go over them. And thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
From you.
Nope, nothing else. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.